Hello and welcome back to Reformed VRC. And today I get to share with you something I've been longing to, and that is God's mission. So far, I have covered with you everything from the gospel, right? A place to begin at, a place to understand how to be saved. I've shared with you the most basic understanding of theology, the pinnacle to understanding salvific issues and how we are saved, and all of that in relation to the law and how to understand what God's will is, and to grow ultimately in a way that's simple and is for those who are new to the faith especially. There's a lot of people out there that you can learn from, but you've chosen to come here, and if you're here, I hope that you've been blessed a great deal with new knowledge that's for people who are a little more younger in the faith or are trying to get their feet started. And this now, where I am, what I am about to share with you is about God's mission. And this is so imperative that you understand, because this gives you credence to understand your place in the universe, and to give you that fulfillment, to give you that joy, to give you that peace, to give you an understanding of the direction and the mission you should have in this life. And so this I get to share with you with great joy. I think that there's a lot of people out there that don't understand God's mission, right? And when I say that, I come from a place with very, very humbly understanding that for a long time I didn't understand a lot. But in it, I hope that I've chosen a pretty great place to look at, specifically in relation to God's mission. You see, we need to start with our eschatology. And what does that mean? Eschatology is the understanding of quote-unquote end times. Bible standard-wise, that's what theologians would use in the terminology, right? Eschatology, the study of end times. Well, we have several views out there, and a lot of you may only know of one. But this is the thing. What I'm about to share with you, it may be very different from what you've heard. You see, about 100 years ago, several different views came to light. And I think one in particular has put a damper on what is so important about God's mission. It actually hides truths. It actually distorts the message of the gospel. And it puts away one of the most amazing prophecies we've ever seen fulfilled and written about in history, so that you can literally look at it and say, they saw this like 70 years beforehand? Yes! And it was written about very detailed. You see, when I go through this book of the book of Revelation is not a book of destruction of everything. It's not a destruction of the whole world. In fact, if you look at Revelation and you read it, John has written in there something very unique. He has even said in the beginning of the book, these things are about to happen very shortly, right? What did Isaiah say about certain things, right? He said the Messiah will come long from now, and it was only 400 years. So how do we make sense of this? When we look at the book of Revelation, John writes in such a way that it almost is plagiarism against these old prophets who wrote apocryphally, right? Apocalyptic writing. And apocalyptic writing, it's using a lot of imagery. It's a lot of detailed pictures. And the thing is, a lot of the stuff he writes is very much like when we see the stars go out and the sun is gone and the moon is gone. And what were those people talking about at that time? What were they prophesying? The destruction of Babylon, the destruction of other countries. They weren't discussing the destruction of the world. And what did John do? He used the same terminology, the same wording, in the same exact way as all those prophets. What John was talking about, very specifically, was one particular city, one particular place. And he used it especially for those people who received the teachings of Jesus. You see, John at this time was off on the island of Patmos, and the Romans at the time who were guarding him would have read all that he had written. And so when John wrote, he was very, very wise. He made the decision to make use of all that they already knew from the Old Testament to help them understand the message he was about to give. So the Romans would say, well, look at all this. He's talking about dragons coming from the ocean and the destruction of the world. That's crazy. This will destroy the church for sure. They'll think he's a crazy person, and they allowed the message to go through. The reality is, though, for anyone who is a believer, anyone who has read the Old Testament, they would know what the message meant. You see, Jesus spoke on it very specifically. He says that all these things will happen in this generation. This generation will not pass away before these things take place. He talks about the destruction of the temple. He talks about how you are to flee the moment you see the armies arrive. Do not go back to your home to gather your belongings. Flee, run for your lives. And John talks about these people who will be a remnant. John talks about all of these things. What does John say? John says these things are about to happen very shortly. And if you pay attention to history, you know John wrote the book of Revelation but a year or two before the destruction of Jerusalem. So, what do these pictures mean, right? It means when God says, every time when God says, the sun will go out, the moon will fall, the stars will be darkened, he is saying, city, get ready because your lights are about to go out. His patience is done. You are through. And so when John writes this, it's a reminder to those in Jerusalem, oh, so this is about to happen, right? And if you look at early church history, you even see all of the Christians selling their homes, selling their properties, getting rid of everything they own just to run, get ready to run and flee, because they know if Jesus says this is going to happen, it's going to happen. If God says something, you can bring that check to the bank and you can cash it. It will happen. And so when we look at this scripture and we even in Acts, we see people selling their property and just giving to those who have need. Yes, that's a good message of how we're to love one another as brothers and sisters and be willing to give freely. But it's also a reminder of history. It's to remind us that Jesus did tell them, this property, it's not going to be of value to you because Jerusalem is going to be destroyed. And all these people knew and they believed him. And so they were selling everything. You can look in history and you can see where the Roman Empire came and they were coming to close in on Jerusalem. And then one part of the army, just one section had to actually retreat for a while and go back toward Rome to suppress some issues. And then the Christians who were there, those who were ready and saw the armies, they fled. And they actually escaped, and the army closed right back in and destroyed Jerusalem. Not one brick left on top of the other of the temple. It was destroyed as he proclaimed in that generation, and John wrote about it just a few years before it happened. Now, you see that, and if you're saying, Matt, then why is this good news for us? It's because now we can look at the rest of the Bible and say, well, then what is God's mission? If this is the revelation, the final revelation written by the apostles, what's so good news? Chapters 20 and on. There lies exactly what we've been seeing from the beginning of the Bible all the way up to now. We see God talking about what? His kingdom will know no end. It will spread throughout the whole earth. The coastlands await his law. He will not tire, he will not weary, until all of it has been put under his feet. All enemies must be put under the feet of Jesus. He will reign until all enemies are placed under his feet. The whole world must submit. And what does Jesus talk about? The whole time he's with his apostles, he has several parables all about the kingdom. He discusses the parable of the mustard seed, right? It's like a tree that's planted, and it's the smallest of all seeds. But in the end, what happens? Its roots fill the whole earth. It becomes a massive tree. What does he also talk about? He talks about the leaven within the bread, right? What happens when you leaven bread? It fills the whole bread. The bread gets, the dough gets bigger. Why? Because it's filling the whole bread. And it starts small and it slowly spreads. It's a process. The thing is, look at you now. Look at the world around you now. The whole world. When Jesus went and ascended into heaven, what did he proclaim? He proclaimed, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. All of it. I am king. Therefore go. Conquer the world. Right? I am king. Go, subdue my enemies. Place them under my feet. In fact, that's why the Christians were persecuted during the early church in Rome, because they were not willing to say Kaiser Kyrios. Caesar is king, Caesar is Lord, because they know that Jesus Christ is El Kippur. He is the mighty God. He is King of kings and Lord of lords, and no one else takes that title. All kings must be cautious and to obey his law, because he is king. He is the one who is ruling. Ultimately, all must go under the feet of Jesus, and all will. When you see Jesus talking to his disciples, he's talking to a few people. Just a handful of disciples and people that were there at the Ascension. And every Sunday, I go to church and I think, wow, there are more Christians in this room than there possibly were during the Ascension. This very little room is filled with far more. The thing is, that is God's goal. The ends of the earth. Every single person, every single nation, all sins, all thoughts, all reason, all logic, all science, everything put under the feet of Jesus. Every business, all of it. And that's huge. It's bigger than every single one of us. None of us can ever expect to be able to commit to such a feat as to fill the entire earth with a message of peace. We will rule by peace. The rest of the world, God's kingdom isn't like dictatorships. It isn't like Mao and Stalin. It isn't like any of the other kingdoms you've seen come before. God intends to bring a kingdom which is reigned by peace and joy and prosperity. The meek shall inherit the earth. Now, What? The fact that this is so big is proof therein that God is the one who will be doing it. He receives all the glory. Yes. This is not Jesus comes back to put all things right because of a church that was, well, a failure. A church that lost. He comes back to a church triumphant. And he will reign with us, putting to death the final enemy, which is death itself. So, there's one more message I wanted to share. This view of the earth is so crucial for your understanding if you want to live a righteous, godly life. Not because of simply understanding that the rule of God is superb in some ethereal way or that he's king of heaven, but because he is both king of heaven and king of earth, and that when you get to view your sanctification and the acts that you do and the thoughts that you have and the businesses that you build and the careers you choose, the thing is, you actually have purpose. All the things you do, they really, really do matter. And not just in an ethereal way, right? It's not just up in the clouds that they matter. It matters here. This is his kingdom. This behind me is his. And he is making it new. When you look at when Jesus is also, you see he tells all these parables in a row discussing how the whole earth is going to go under his rule. And then he also gives a parable about the wheat and the tares, right? The wheat and the weeds. And that an enemy comes and sows, bad seed. Well, what is he talking about there? He's giving us a picture of exactly how he does that. How does he conquer the world? Well, throughout, he purifies his church. One of the ways in which he does so is, well, with persecution, one. Guess what? Those who are bad seed, who were, sown among rocks and the roots grabbed around rocks, they get swept away. They leave immediately as soon as persecution arises. What about the wheat? What about the seed that was sown in brambles? They get choked out by what? By wealth. That is one of the biggest ones that we see today. The Bible's very clear upon wealth. It says those who have wealth, it's harder to get into the kingdom than anyone else. And with this great wealth is a huge responsibility. Here in the United States, people believe they can live without God. They don't need God in their lives. They can survive just fine on their own. It wasn't that way 300 years ago. 300 years ago, a family would be spending the entire year preparing for winter, else they'd starve and die. What about you? Anytime you want, you can go to the store and pick up food. Nothing matters. You're out of a job. That sucks. Oh well, I'll get another. The whole idea of a livelihood being taken from you, a job being taken from you, was that it's your livelihood. To take it from you is to take your life. Now, people don't fear that. And what is to make them fear God? See, this is it. We're at a pinnacle here. It's so important. If it weren't for God, you would not be breathing. This is why we have the Lord's Prayer. What does God teach us to pray. Jesus teaches us to pray like this: Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. May your name be holy. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Think about this. How strictly do you think the will of God is kept in heaven? That's how we are to pray, that it's done here just the same way as it is in his heavens, in his holy throne room. Give us this day our daily bread. No matter how much work I do, it doesn't matter. It is for nothing. It means nothing if God does not provide that bread for me. If he does not provide me my sustenance, I receive nothing. It is by his grace alone in which I have received anything to sustain my life. And forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. So yeah, you are to forgive continually, and we pray and we ask and we plead God to also forgive us our debts. You see, this is a part of it. This is us learning to change, us learning to be more like God. God has forgiven more than you could ever fathom. May we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Right? Deliver us from evil. Don't let us remain in evil. Do not lead us toward evil. Deliver us from it. Right? Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. This is what Jesus has said. This is how he taught us to pray. How does any of that make sense if he isn't the mighty warrior which all have been preparing for, have been waiting for since the beginning of time? No, the Jews had it right. He is. He is a mighty warrior. He is going to conquer the whole of the world. He is going to conquer the entire nations. And he has started with you. And he started with me. And he started with the disciples. Well. So, with all this in mind, what's your mission? If God's mission is the entire world, what part do you play? Who are you to be? And I'd like to get into this more in the next video. All right. I love you all. Take care. I'll see you in the next one.